All right. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me for another free masterclass. I know some of you have came to my first one, Pillars of Health, which is now uploaded and available on YouTube. So if you want to check that one out, you can do so. We dove into what I believe to be kind of like the 4 foundational aspects when it comes to health. Now, tonight, we're going to be deep diving into the concept of detoxification, cleansing, detoxes in general, and whether or not we actually need them. And it was interesting because when I did research for this class tonight, it was fascinating to witness the polar opposite fields depending on where I got my information from. So that was the first thing that really kind of smacked me in my face. It was like, some sources were like, it's a scam. You don't need to detox. Your body does it for you. They're just trying to sell you snake oil, like all these types of statements. And then you swing the pendulum completely the other way. And you have, proponents of having to do yearly detoxes, and they have to be rather purgative in, in nature and, really restrictive. And I was like, okay, well, there has to be some truth somewhere in the middle. And that was really what sort of motivated me to want to run this class, because you start heading down the Google rabbit hole of whether or not you need to detoxify, and it's very confusing. And so first things first, I want to talk a little bit about the concept of practicing some discernment. And I think that's really important. In the last few years, I'm sure a lot of us can agree that being discerning about where our information is coming from, whether it feels like truth, is vitally important. And that goes without saying, I think, for a topic like what we're talking about tonight, detoxing and cleansing. I should mention, this is a multi-million, if not billion-dollar industry. So I want to have that in the back of your mind, because a lot of the information that is available out there when you're doing research is motivated by what? Money, right? And so we have to really, again, practice asking some good questions. Where are these studies funded? And what do you believe and hold to be true? Now, of course, I'm going to share my thoughts and viewpoints on it tonight. I would love for this to be, a little bit of an active discussion. So if you have thoughts, if you have viewpoints, if you have questions, drop them in the chat. The chat will be open for the entire class tonight. And I'll make sure I'll keep glancing over to answer all of your questions. So the first thing I want to start with is some really basic information, like what are toxins? Like what are we even talking about when we talk about detoxification? Because that's something else too that can be confusing, because if you look into detoxification, a lot of it is like withdrawal from medications or alcohol. And that's not what this class is about. While of course that is a form of detoxification, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about all of the substances that we are inundated with on a regular basis that can be found in our food, our water, our environment, our medications, our personal care products. All of these things contain substances that impact our body and its ability to function properly. And what's really interesting about these kinds of substances, chemicals, is that they also cause inflammation in the body. And one thing that, most sources can agree upon in this day and age is that inflammation is the root cause of most disease states. And so anything that's coming into our body that could potentially cause inflammation is something that we should probably have, our shields or like our radar up about, and be like, maybe I should learn more about this. And so here are some examples of just some of the toxins and chemicals that we are exposed to, unfortunately, on a daily basis. So some of them are going to be found in our foods in the form of fungicides, herbicides, and of course, everyone's heard of Roundup, glyphosate, right? And so we know that these are things that are really, really difficult to avoid at this point. Even the organic food industry allows a certain amount of chemicals to be used in the growing and production of the food. Now, they all have to be organic, fungicides, herbicides, but they can still be used. So that's one example. Another example would be excitotoxins. And I've talked about this a lot with my students, and these would be things like artificial food dyes, aspartame, MSG. So these are substances that are found in our food, in addition to whatever sprays and chemicals have been used in the growing and production of it. In our water, we're worried about things like chlorine and fluoride. And of course, fluoride is probably a whole other beast that we could talk about in a different class. I encourage you to do your own reading on that, and your comfort levels around using it, of course. But to me, it's not something that we should be putting into our bodies, again, just based on my research, but I would love a loving debate about that. So again, drop your thoughts in the chat. Also, we have things that we have to think about in terms of our personal care products. So now we're talking about things like fragrance. Fragrance is a catch-all term that I want all of you to be aware of. Something that really only came into my awareness probably in the last 5 or 6 years. Fragrance is a proprietary term. So what that means is that companies that put that on their bottles, so if it's in your shampoo or your body wash or whatever, they don't have to tell you what it is because it's their secret sauce. So if they're using the term fragrance, that's their proprietary recipe for whatever scent your product has, and they don't have to disclose what chemical concoctions that they use in order to create that scent. So it's something we have to be aware of. Even there's a brand here in Canada widely available called Live Clean. And it's available at Shoppers Drug Mart and all of this. I used it for years until I was like, what is this fragrance term, right? And so that's that one area, you know, that 98% clean ingredients, and then they go and throw fragrance in there. And it's a little scary. We dive into this in my membership platform in quite a bit more detail about some of the things that they can use in order to create fragrance. Parabens are another thing. Formaldehyde is a common ingredient in a lot of makeup brands. Other things like DHT, DEA, like all of these ingredients that we kind of have to be aware of that are in everything we use. And of course, we also have to be concerned about things like heavy metals, which can be found, you know, in a lot of different sources. So this is just some examples of some of the toxins that we're exposed to on a regular basis. Oh yeah, so someone's saying Live Clean also claims no SLS, but it's one of their first ingredients. Yeah, I think they're using a slightly difference in this is where we have to be really savvy and read our labels, because SLS stands for sodium lauryl sulfate, I believe. And as soon as they change it to sodium lauryl and then, you know, a slightly different S word on the other end, they can then claim it's SLS free. And all it is a slightly modified ingredient of the first one, right? Which is a sudsing agent. It's SLS is put into things like toothpaste and shampoos in order to make it sudsy and foamy. And so that's one of the biggest complaints when people switch to a natural product. They're like, but I don't have the big head of foam on my head. And I'm like, no, you don't. And your brain cells thank you for it. But it's one of the things you have to get used to when you start to do what we call a ditch and switch, where you start looking into these ingredients and you're like, I don't know if I want to use them anymore. But anyway, that's, again, probably another class for another day. So here it is. You've got some ingredients in products and foods and things that you might want to avoid. Other areas that we have to be aware of too are inflammatory foods. And inflammatory foods, to me, they borderline this sort of, we're dancing around the subject of toxins, right? Inflammatory foods react in the body very similar to the way a toxin would if it comes into the body, causing inflammation. And so this can lead to things like leaky gut, Crohn's, other chronic inflammatory conditions. Over the long term, you can start to develop things like arthritis, eczema, psoriasis, you know, as your body starts to deal with these inflammatory foods. And when that happens, it impairs our organs' ability to actually do their job, which I'm going to pause on that and come back to that statement a little bit later, because that's really important, because all of our organs have really important jobs in the body, and we are really dependent on their ability to actually do them. So let's remember that, and we'll circle back to that a little bit later. Some examples of foods that are borderline toxic would be sugar. The way the body actually responds to sugar is how it responds to a lot of different drugs as well. Things like alcohol, seed oils. Seed oils have become ubiquitous in most processed and packaged foods because they're very, very, very cheap to manufacture. And so now they're being used in everything. So this would be like sunflower oil, canola oil, safflower oil, and they're highly inflammatory in the body. So therefore the body reacts to them in a similar way as it would a toxin. And of course, large quantities of foods that would be considered anti-nutrients. For some people, dairy, or GMO grains can also act as a toxin in the body. Now, I really want to point out, remember how I mentioned at the beginning of the class that there was sort of these two polarizing points of view? Each one of those views had something that I like to call a paradigm. It's sort of a lens in which the person being interviewed or, the practitioner sort of viewed their information through. And so we have to be aware of what that paradigm is when we're reading our studies, our articles, and all of these things so that we can understand the viewpoint of the person sharing this information. So today we're going to kind of talk about 2 points of view, and one being sort of the modern medical paradigm and the other being a more holistic natural health practitioner type paradigm. I'm not saying either is right or wrong, but when we understand where the information is coming from, we're better able to discern whether it's the kind of information that resonates with us and makes sense with us. So most of the articles that were talking about detoxification being hogwash, they're selling you snake oil, they're just trying to sell you all these expensive laxatives, which we'll get back to as well, because that can sometimes be the case. They all came from a more medical standpoint. And the medical standpoint is toxins can't accumulate in the body. If they did, you'd be dead. The number of articles that I read where physicians were quoted saying almost that exact phrase, if you had toxins in your body, you'd be dead. And from their standpoint, from a pure physiological standpoint, I see what they're saying, right? If we couldn't evacuate our bowels, if our kidneys weren't working and we couldn't expel waste, eventually we'd go into sepsis and die. So they are correct from that very basic standpoint. Also, along with that, they often framed the detoxification industry as prying on people who are gullible. And that it was a scam. So that was a very interesting viewpoint too that was often presented. Now, here's where I want you to start practicing a bit of discernment, because unfortunately, when we have an industry that's worth potentially billions of dollars, hey, guess what? There are people who are trying to scam you, and there are people who just want to take your money, and they might be selling you crap. And so this is where, unfortunately, there is some layers of truth within some of this information. So here are some questions that we have to ask ourselves. First, are these products even well formulated? A lot of the over-the-counter detoxification kits, I mean, one, they're not formulated for you, for your needs, what your body is going through. Most of the time, they're very, very strong in nature because they're trying to produce some type of effect that the person's going to feel. Usually, and this is where I'm going to circle back to the laxatives, a lot of these products often contain really potent herbal laxatives. And I think the viewpoint is like, wow, I'm pooping lots, so it must be working. And that's not necessarily the case. Your body could just be irritated. So it's something to keep in mind. There's also something that we have to really pay attention to as well, is that if we're leading a lifestyle where we are consciously choosing to put toxins into our body on a regular basis, and zero judgment, right? We all consciously choose things all the time. My goal as a practitioner and a teacher is to always provide people with information so they can make the best choices for them. So many of my clients had no idea what was in their hair dyes or in their toothpaste or what was being sprayed on the foods that they ate. And once they had that information, then they could then make different choices if they decided to, right? It's always ultimately their choice. But if you live a lifestyle that is highly inundated with a lot of those toxins we talked about at the beginning of the class, once a year, a 7-day juice fast is probably not going to impact your body the way that you're hoping it would. It's kind of like the idea of eating junk food 355 days a year and then go working out at the gym for 10 days and hoping that's going to be enough to sort of band-aid solution, right? The idea that, you're running through the McDonald's drive-through every night or drinking 4 liters of coffee or whatever your vices might be, 10 days at the gym a year is not going to be the solution. And so I think it's important that we recognize that oftentimes detoxification can be done on a daily basis through the choices we make. A lot of the detoxes that are pushed out on Pinterest, and you just Google this, a lot of them are dangerous. Like the water detox, for example, most human bodies are not capable or would be able to tolerate going from whatever they were eating and consuming before to doing nothing but water. The amount of side effects you would have and the shock that it would put your body through could actually potentially be dangerous. Really restrictive fasting, where people just stop eating for 4 or 5 days, can also be dangerous. Our body requires calories, it requires glucose just to keep our brain running. And so, it's important to recognize that some of the things that are promoted aren't safe, like the Masterclass. Has anyone ever tried that one? Let me know in the chat. That's the one where it's, I think, water, lemon juice, cayenne, and a little bit of maple syrup or something. And I think that's all you're supposed to live off of for I don't know how many days. And again, depending on what your lifestyle, diet, and everything were like before, and the toxin load you have in your body, that's a huge shock for your system. And so a lot of these things have to be taken into consideration. Also, a lot of these kits, blogs, and things that people are trying to sell you don't take into consideration your current health status. Do you have any chronic inflammatory conditions that might be exacerbated by moving through this type of healing protocol? Are you on medications? And so it's really important to take those pieces of information as well. So there's one area where I found the argument from the more medical paradigm really fell short. Their biggest argument was, our body can detox. It does it by itself. That's why you have kidneys and liver. So you don't need to worry about detoxing from, things like fungicides, herbicides, and other chemicals, or some of the things are in your personal care products. You have to worry about that. Your liver and kidneys can do that job for you. Well, that comes back to that statement I wanted to kind of put a bit of pause on, and that was, if our body's functioning well. And unfortunately, the reality of the situation is most humans are moving through some sort of state of inflammation, disease, or imbalance in their bodies. Most of us have unresolved healing within our bodies, which means one or more of our organ systems may not be functioning at peak level. In fact, in the world that we live in, with the amount of stress that we're exposed to, how busy we are, how much time we spend in front of screens, which results in a more sedentary lifestyle, coupling that with the toxins we're exposed to, most of us are not in peak physical health, which means our organ systems might not be functioning in peak physical health either. And also, the modern medical paradigm doesn't take into consideration a lot of the toxins that are stored in our fat cells. And that's a lot of them. So this was something that was really interesting. I had to write some of this down so I didn't forget for you guys. So one thing I want to mention is most endocrine disruptors and hormone disruptors are fat-based. And so when the body doesn't know how to deal with them or break them down, and we'll go into that a little bit later in the class, it dumps them in our fat cells. So unless you're 0% body fat, I don't know if anyone here in the group is, I'm certainly not, you probably have some hormone mimicking or endocrine disrupting hormones floating around in your system. So the medical field doesn't take that into consideration. They also don't take into consideration new and emerging information, which is constantly changing on a daily basis. So here was one example of an article I read, came out last year, and it said, just don't drink as much. You don't need to do these detoxes, just take a break every few days. Well, there's new information that's emerged that said there's no amount of alcohol that's safe. I think it was the Canadian government that just came out with that information, and the American government backed it up. So here we have outdated information. Look at BPA. I mean, when I was a kid, that stuff lined every can my parents bought. Every can of beans, corn, tuna, whatever my mom brought home, every can would have been lined with BPA, and it would have been considered safe, probably for decades. And now we have new information. So how much of that chemical, of that toxin, is still floating around in our systems? So we have to take that into consideration. Something else that the modern medical field doesn't take into consideration is baseline metabolic health. And I actually want to share my screen for this, so that way anyone who wants to write it down, you can, just because, it might be easier for you to see it out. I just have one slide for you guys, but I'm going to share it. So first I'm going to go into what is the definition of metabolic health. Metabolic health is the absence of disease. Pretty lame, right? Metabolic health is the absence of metabolic disease. And disease indicates when one or more system in the body isn't functioning the way that it should. So here we go. Just give me 1 sec. Let me get my screen up. Okay. And let me know when everyone can see that. All right. Andrea, I see your camera's on. Do I have a thumbs up? Are you able to see that? Okay, perfect. So baseline metabolic health. And first I'm going to state, don't shoot the messenger. I did not create these standards or definitions, but I'm hard pressed to find a client, family member, or friend, including myself, that is able to check every single one of these boxes. So the first one is minimal belly fat. And the definition of minimal belly fat is a waist circumference of 40 inches or greater for men. Okay, so we want it less than that. I should have written less than, or 35 inches and greater for women. You would be considered as someone who would have a little bit too much weight around the midline area, which is a precursor for many health states and conditions. The next is normal blood sugar, which is also something that is a big issue in modern day culture right now. In fact, type 2 diabetes is quickly outpacing many of the other chronic inflammatory and health conditions. And we are now seeing it in children in unprecedented rates. Okay, so that's something else too. I want you to think about, I don't know how old everyone is here in the audience tonight, but when I was a child, it was not called type 1 and type 2 diabetes. It was called juvenile diabetes and adult onset. They had to change the definitions of those because adults were suddenly developing juvenile diabetes, type 1, and children were getting adult onset diabetes. And so normal blood sugar is considered a baseline for metabolic health. So is normal blood pressure. So is having a stable appetite and energy. So this kind of lumps into normal blood sugar as well. So of course, this would also mean not having huge dips in your blood sugar or energy levels. So that way things like your cortisol levels and your adrenals are also functioning well. So you're not experiencing these huge crashes in energy. Next would be, I did too, muscles, bones, and joints that are healthy and allow you to be active. So you should be able to bend down and harvest potatoes or go, chase your kid around the backyard, kick the soccer ball around, or, go for a nice long walk around the block without being in pain. No medications at all, and no pain. So if you're able to check all of these off, first of all, awesome sauce, give yourself a pat on the back. If you're not, don't worry. These are things we can get back, right? And we can get to. But if you're not able to check every one of those boxes off, that could indicate that there are systems in your body that maybe need a little bit of TLC, that need some support. And this is what I'm talking about in terms of this modern medical idea. I'll stop sharing my screen now. That, the body can detox on its own. It doesn't need help. Okay, that's if it's functioning well. And so that's what I want you to get your mind around when you're reading the articles that completely dismiss detoxification. But of course, we practice our discernment, right? We do recognize that people are trying to make money off of us, and that there are financial motivations for a lot of what's being shared. So now I kind of want to talk about a holistic viewpoint. We talked about the modern medical viewpoint, and now I want to talk about a more holistic, natural health, whatever term you like to use, viewpoint. And my viewpoint, this is very much my viewpoint. And again, please drop any questions, comments you have in the chat, or thoughts you'd like to share. But everything we eat, we interact with, we put into our bodies, and we're exposed to affects our body. And that includes the humans we interact with on a daily basis as well. And that nothing exists in isolation. And so to me, it's one of the biggest downfalls of the current iteration of the modern medical field. Now, not saying I don't want to make a blanket statement about all physicians. There's a lot of really great functional medicine practitioners that are coming out. A lot of doctors are deciding that they need to start studying things like nutrition, which is not taught in medical school, and even things like herbs and understanding supplements so they can better support their patients. But the field in general, the paradigm by which that field sort of defines itself doesn't connect how things like stress and lack of sleep and physical pain and how inflammation and all of these things impact our body's ability to detoxify. Something else I want to mention, if the idea of detoxification was a complete scam, why do I see results in clinic? That's my biggest question that I have when I was reading through, and I was able to find dozens of articles that talked about how the detox industry was just a scam. Yet as a practitioner, when people come to see me in clinic, why do I see improved sleep, improved cognition, skin conditions clearing up, digestion improving? Why am I seeing menstrual irregularities resolving themselves, reduced pain, increased libido, all of these things? Why do I see this in clinic if it's just a scam? So part of me has to take some anecdotal and experiential evidence into consideration. I'm not just going to believe the article from the Huffington Post that says what I do is a scam, because I have clients that prove otherwise. I have myself that proves otherwise. However, again, we have to take into consideration your health, your baseline metabolic health. What's your lifestyle like in general? And of course, you know, we look at healing a little differently in the holistic field. We usually start with digestion. So I'm going to dive into some of the organs of elimination just to give you a bit of background. I'm only going to touch on these super briefly. If this is something you're like, wow, I want to learn more about this, I'll give you a couple of ways that you can learn more with me at the end of class. Of course, I'll open it up for Q&A as well. So this is really basic, really, really basic. So one of our main organs of elimination is our liver. And our, pardon me, our liver is responsible for the removal of fat-soluble toxins for the most part. I'm really minimizing the liver's role. You know, you want to go down to like anatomy and physiology rabbit hole and have yourself some fun. Look at the literally hundreds of metabolic practices, or practices. Metabolic functions is the word I'm looking for, that the liver is responsible for. It is a powerhouse organ. So when I say it's responsible only for fat-soluble toxins, it's a little more complicated than that. Unfortunately, it's not a completely efficient system. The reason for this is because the liver is susceptible to something called the first pass effect. So what this means is that if there's an area of the body that gets first dibs on energy and fresh blood flow, it goes there first and then circles back around to the liver. So you have to kind of be aware of that. And it can't always break down the fat-soluble toxins. Sometimes it doesn't know what to do with them. So sometimes they try to emulsify them so that way it can be expelled through feces. Sometimes they the liver tries to convert it into a water-soluble toxin so it can be expelled through the kidneys and the urinary tract. And other times it just is like, I don't know what to do with this, and it dumps it in fat cells. So it's not a super efficient means of fat-soluble toxin elimination. The colon, of course, helps to remove physical like waste, so through bowel movements. It absorbs all of our nutrients and everything first through the large intestines, and anything that's considered waste material is then expelled. Kidneys removes a lot of our water-soluble toxins. The lungs act as a physical filter in many ways, helping to stop things from getting into the body, but it also filters the blood. And then that blood, it then sends it to the liver and the kidneys to do further detoxification. And finally, our lymphatic system, which is actually a cardiovascular overflow system. So it's part of the fluid systems that move with the cardiovascular system. But of course, it will expel toxins through sweat and through our lymph nodes. And so that's something to keep in mind as well. What are those personal care products you're using that actually stop the sweating process? Something we have to keep in mind, because our body it needs to sweat in order to expel toxins. So next, I'm going to go into some benchmarks for elimination. Okay, so these are the things you need to be looking for as your little check boxes. So we had our check boxes for baseline metabolic health, and now we have our check boxes for elimination. And if you can click all of these, then maybe you don't need detoxification support, and that's awesome. So keep that in mind. The first one is urinating. So we need to be urinating on a regular basis. Healthy urine should have very little scent to it. It should be kind of a light straw color. You don't want it to be completely clear, at least not all of your washroom visits to be completely clear. That could be an indication that you're actually overhydrated. So this should have just like a light yellow color to it and very little odor. I know some of you already know the answer to this. I'm curious in the chat, let me know, how many glasses of water do you think you need to drink a day? And Weavers, no cheating. You guys all know this one. I'll give it a minute to see if anyone has an answer they'd like to hazard to guess. Because this is also something that's really interesting too, the controversy around how much water we should drink. It doesn't look like anyone wants to jump in on that. Yes, it does depend on your weight. So you're going to take, I don't know the in ounces, so this is only in pounds, but you're going to take your body weight in pounds. You're going to divide that in half, and that's how many ounces you need to drink a day in order for your body to complete all of the physiological and hormonal processes that are required. So that means if you're 180 pounds, you need to be drinking 90 ounces of water a day. So I can tell you that I have to drink at least 2 of these a day. And so most of us are not actually well hydrated. And it's something that's really important to understand, that our bodies are mostly water, and that water is the messenger that brings everything to where it needs to go, including most of the hormonal functions in the body. So are you well hydrated? That's your first benchmark. Are you urinating frequently? And is it, that light straw color and with very little odor? Next are bowel movements. I'm curious too, drop it in the chat. How many bowel movements do you think you should have a day? Curious about this one as well, because I always get different answers. I remember when I asked my mother-in-law the first time, she said 2 to 3 a week. So that was her answer. What she thought were how many bowel movements she should have. So 1 per meal. Yep. After every time you eat. There we go. Look at that. Once per day. Okay. All right, cool. So in a perfect world, in a beautifully functioning human vessel that has no stress, that eats no chemicals, and I don't know, just lounges around all day maybe and gets some exercise every now and again, we would be having 3 bowel movements a day, or we would be having as many bowel movements as meals. And again, they should be fairly well formed with little to no odor. I mean, there's going to be some, guys, it's waste, okay? But if it has a very strong odor, that's indicating that your body is releasing some toxins. Of course, there should be no food or blood or mucus in your bowel movements either. And when I say food, like bits of undigested food material, I'm sure we've all been there. Now, some food, let's be honest, our body can't digest, even if you're in peak physical health, like corn. For most people, corn goes right through you, right? So it should ideally. So when I'm working with clients, my goal is to try to get people up to 2 bowel movements a day. And again, healthy, right? We're not talking about constipated type bowel movements or loose stool either. And if you're really curious what that means, I'll type it in the chat. You can look up the Bristol stool chart. So there's a bit of homework for everybody. You can look up the Bristol stool chart and you can compare your bowel movements to that and see where you fall. So we have urinating and bowel movements as benchmarks to, okay, is our body functioning the way that it really needs to be? Also breathing well. Are you a mouth breather or are you a nose breather? Are you breathing deeply into your diaphragm, or are you wearing, what are they called, those restrictive undergarments, Spanx or something that doesn't let you breathe and you're only breathing up in that first half of your respiratory cavity? Do you find yourself as a person who's constantly holding your breath? That's me when I'm under what I call to be more stressful situations. I'm not a big fan of city driving. So whenever I drive in a city, I find myself holding my breath. I have to consciously remind myself to breathe and to breathe deep into our bellies as well. But also, we're supposed to be mostly breathing through our nose. And my mind is blanked. I want to find him. He's a really great practitioner to follow on Instagram. He talks a lot about mouth breathing. Yeah, Dr. Vincent Esposito. So he's excellent. Dr. Vincent Esposito, he is fantastic. I'm not exactly sure what his qualifications are, if he's a functional medicine practitioner or chiropractor or whatever, but I love his work. And he talks a lot about the health implications if you're a mouth breather, especially when you're sleeping. So are we breathing well? Okay, so are we peeing? Are we pooping? Are we breathing? Are we sweating? Are we preventing ourselves from sweating? Question number one. Okay, are we still using antiperspirant? Something that's really important to ask yourself, because our body requires us to sweat. Also, it really shouldn't have much of an odor either. Now, I know what a lot of you are going to say, but that is actually the case. And that is an indication that your body is trying to expel some toxins. That's not a problem, right? That's why I created a lot of the course material that I have, and why I talk so passionately about this, because I want to help bodies. I want to help humans be healthier. That's really all it is. I want to share information so that you can feel better and more vibrant and have more energy and feel good about yourself. So, you know, our sweat shouldn't have too much of an odor. If it does, again, indicating that the body needs to expel some toxins. Also, another good indicator for the women in the audience is your menstrual cycle. Okay, if you are housing especially endocrine disrupting hormones, your menstrual cycle may be disrupted. Are you experiencing a regular cycle? What is the blood consistency like when you are menstruating? Is it a bright red color? Do you experience a lot of cramping or pain? Are there heavy clots in your menstrual blood? These are indications that the body is struggling. So all of these things that we've been told are normal, right? Oh, it's totally normal to get bloated after you eat, or not be able to sleep, or to have menstrual cramps, or to get headaches all the time. These things are not normal. In a well-functioning body, they don't happen. Now, this isn't, again, meant to be a judgment. It's meant for us to learn what our benchmarks are for health, and then to ask ourselves, are there ways that I can support my body so that I can get to a place where I'm sleeping better, right? Where I no longer experience headaches, where I don't have digestive discomfort, where I don't have menstrual discomfort. So again, that's my goal for most of this. So that is the main chat for me. I do want to show you the back end of Detox Your Life, which is a class that I just launched, but I'm also opening up the questions. Any Q&A, drop it. I am an open book. So I want you guys to feel free to ask any questions you'd like. But one more time, I'm going to share my screen so you can see, if you are interested in Detox Your Life, what it looks like and what you would be getting. Well, that is not the screen I wanted to share. All right, courses. So when you log in, this is essentially what the class looks like. Everyone gets access to a Start Here module where you get all of the basics. And every single one of my classes will have this Start Here module because I think it's really important. So the first one would be herbal terminology. It's got a short class lesson, and then everything comes with a PDF handout, which you can then print out. So this one, for example, has lots of pages, and it's got all the different definitions that you might need once you start navigating the herbal world. Of course, we learn about botanical names, types of preparations. So this is all of the really little mini lessons that you get in the Start Here section. In Detox Your Life, this is where the meat, the meat of the class is. So we have an entire class, I can't remember, it's almost an hour long, on products that kill. And we go through all the different ingredients and things that you need to be aware of. Plus, of course, like with all my classes, there is a professional handout that is also available that accompanies the classes. So we go, like you can see here, right? We go into parabens and where you're going to find them, BHA and BHT, phthalates, coal tar dyes, aluminum, and so on. We also have an entire class, and this was something that was really important for me to talk about, and this was interactions, right? I think it's really, really important for people to recognize that some of our toxicity comes from relationships, and I know that's a controversial thing to say, isn't it? But it's also a really important thing to say. So we have an entire 45-minute class on, diving into interactions that are potentially contributing to kind of like toxic loads, so to speak. Here's for the anatomy and physiology fans. And thank you for that comment. Andrea just said this module changed her life, and that's really cool. So as a side note, in my membership platform, you get access to this class plus over a year's worth of material. But this one is also available separate. We have an entire class on the organs of elimination. So this is for my anatomy and physiology nerds in the audience. I am one of them. You get handout for that as well. We also have an entire class on herbal therapeutics. How do we use herbs? How do we formulate? What are the things that we like? What kind of plants do we need to use in order to support our detoxification practices? We also go into side effects and other supportive detox products. So this would be things like zeolite and diatomaceous earth and some of the other things that you hear all about. We dive into that. You also get access to the Truth About Sugar, which is an entire masterclass on sugar over an hour, almost an hour long. And then you also get access to a few masterclasses, Pillars of Health, and also one I did on Herring's Law of Cure. So this is what you get if you do decide to sign up for Detox Your Life. And what's kind of neat about this, as opposed to the monthly membership platform, is you get lifetime access. It's a one-time payment and you get access to the course for life. So that part's really neat. Weavers, of course, is a monthly membership platform. So you do, of course, get access to Detox Your Life, as well as, like I said, we've done over 15 different herbal monographs at this point. We've done entire classes on the nervous system, the immune system, the digestive system. So you're getting a lot of material there, but it is a monthly membership platform. So they're two different things. That's all right. I'm always available for questions. If you have them after class, I will drop my email in here as well. So feel free to email me if you have any questions at all. I just want to thank everyone for coming to this class this evening. It will be available on recording, so I'll get this up onto YouTube so you can check it out there. And I hope to see you in my next masterclass.